Welcome back to Midnight Peaks. You asked for a deeper dive, and the mountains have plenty more to give. Tonight, we're slowing things down. We're going into the long, winding tales where the dread builds like the evening fog. Grab your coffee, lock the doors, and let's head back into the hollows. The house that shouldn't be there. This story comes from a veteran land surveyor named Marcus, who was working deep in the wilderness of the Unaka Mountains. He was miles from any recorded settlement, following a creek bed, when he stumbled upon a perfectly maintained Victorian-style farmhouse in a clearing. Now Marcus knew the maps. There shouldn't have been anything out there but timber and rock. But there it was, fresh white paint, a manicured lawn, and the smell of baking bread. Curious, he approached the porch. He saw a woman through the window, dressed in clothes from the turn of the century, setting a table for four. He knocked, wanting to ask for directions. The moment his knuckle hit the wood, the house changed. The white paint peeled away in seconds like burning paper. The glass shattered. The woman he saw turned toward him, and Marcus realized she had no face, just smooth, pale skin where features should be. He didn't wait. He scrambled back to his truck, and when he returned with a crew the next day using GPS coordinates, there was nothing but a 100-year-old ruin, covered in vines that looked like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. The journey into the unknown. Igor Dyatlov, the real story in history. 9 elite hikers, 1 impenetrable mystery, and a tent ripped open, not from the outside, but from the inside. What made 9 experienced mountaineers flee into a sub-zero blizzard without their boots? Today we're declassifying the final days of Igor Dyatlov. It was supposed to be an adventure, a test of endurance, courage, and human will against the brutal forces of nature. In the freezing winter of 1959, a group of young, experienced hikers set out into the unforgiving Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia, led by a confident and skilled student named Igor Dyatlov. They were not amateurs. These were trained individuals who had faced extreme conditions before, people who understood the mountains, respected the dangers, and knew how to survive in places where most would not last a single night. But what happened to them would defy logic, science, and human understanding. What began as a journey of ambition turned into one of the darkest and most terrifying mysteries in history. The journey into the unknown. The group consisted of 9 hikers, each one carefully selected, each one strong, disciplined, and determined. They planned a challenging expedition across snow-covered peaks where temperatures could drop far below freezing and the wind could cut through flesh like a blade. Their goal was to reach a remote mountain known as Otorten, a place whose name ominously translates to "don't go there" in the local language. But for these adventurers, danger was part of the thrill. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the environment began to change. The weather worsened, the winds howled louder, snowstorms became more aggressive, visibility dropped. Still, they pressed forward. Their journals and photographs, later recovered, show moments of laughter, teamwork, and determination. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing suggested the horror that was about to unfold. Eventually, the group made a critical decision. Instead of moving to a safer, lower area, they set up camp on the exposed slope of a mountain. It was a choice that would seal their fate. That night, everything changed. The night no one survived. What exactly happened that night remains one of the greatest mysteries ever recorded. Sometime in the darkness, under the crushing silence of the frozen mountains, something triggered absolute terror among the group. The evidence discovered later paints a chilling picture. Their tent was not open normally. It was cut open from the inside. Think about that for a moment. 9 trained hikers choosing to slash their way out of their own shelter in the middle of a deadly snowstorm, without proper clothing, without shoes. It wasn't panic over something small. It wasn't confusion. It was fear. Raw, overwhelming, uncontrollable fear. They ran into the night, barefoot, half-dressed, into temperatures that could kill within minutes. Whatever they saw, or heard, or felt, it was enough to drive them into certain death. The search and the horrifying discovery. When the group failed to return on time, search teams were sent into the mountains. Days passed with no sign of them. Then finally, the first clue appeared: their campsite. The tent stood partially collapsed under the snow, eerily silent, abandoned, but the details were wrong. The cut in the fabric confirmed something unnatural had occurred. Their belongings were still inside: boots, warm clothes, supplies, all left behind as if they had fled in an instant. Then came the footprints. They showed that the hikers had walked, some even calmly at first, away from the tent. But as rescuers followed the trail, the scene grew darker. The first bodies were found near a forest edge. 2 of them, frozen to death, barefoot, lying close to the remains of a small fire they had desperately tried to build. Their skin was burned in places, as if they had come too close to the flames in their final moments. But that was only the beginning. As more bodies were discovered over time, the true horror revealed itself. Some hikers had injuries that made no sense, not the kind caused by cold, but by immense force. Cracked skulls, broken ribs, so severe it was compared to the impact of a car crash, and yet there were no external wounds to match such violence. One of the most disturbing discoveries was the body of Ludmila Dubanina. When she was found, parts of her face were missing, her tongue, her eyes, gone. It was a sight so horrifying, it left even experienced investigators shaken. And then came another chilling detail: some of their clothing tested positive for radiation. Theories that only deepen the mystery. Over the years, countless theories have tried to explain what happened on that night. Some believe it was an avalanche, a sudden rush of snow forcing them to flee. The slope wasn't steep enough. The tent wasn't buried the way it should have been. Others suggest secret military testing. Perhaps the hikers stumbled upon classified experiments, weapons, or explosions that caused panic and fatal injuries. The presence of radiation only fuels this idea. Then there are more unusual explanations. Infrasound, low-frequency sound waves caused by wind, might have triggered extreme psychological fear, a kind of invisible force that drives humans into irrational panic. And of course, there are those who believe the answer lies beyond science, something unknown, something not yet understood. Because no matter how many theories exist, none can fully explain all the evidence. The most terrifying truth, but perhaps the most chilling part of this entire story, is not the injuries, or the mystery, or even the unanswered questions. It's the realization that, in their final moments, these hikers were not confused, they were not lost, they were running from something that made them abandon safety, ignore survival instincts, and choose the freezing darkness over whatever remained inside that tent. And that raises one final question. What could possibly be more terrifying than freezing to death, alone, in the middle of nowhere? Outro: the mystery lives on. To this day, the case of the Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. Official reports have tried to close the chapter, labeling it as a natural disaster, a tragic accident, an unfortunate chain of events. But the truth is, we still don't know, and maybe we never will, because some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to remind us that even in a world driven by logic, there are still things waiting in the dark. The mountains are old, older than the trees, older than the animals, and maybe older than light itself. If you're out there tonight, keep your windows rolled up. And if you see a house that isn't on the map, keep driving. Thanks for joining us at Midnight Peaks. Sleep well, if you can. The Echoes of Blackwood Manor. The Invitation. You know that feeling you get when you're being watched? Not just a glance, but a heavy, freezing stare that crawls up your spine? That's how it started for Elias. Elias was a skeptic. He didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or things that go bump in the night. To him, the world was math and logic. So when he received the letter, thick, cream-colored parchment with a wax seal, he didn't think haunted. He thought payday. The letter was from the estate of Arthur Blackwood, a reclusive billionaire who had died under, let's call them, unusual circumstances. The task was simple: stay in Blackwood Manor for 3 nights, to catalog the library. The pay, $50,000. Simple, right? The arrival. The drive up to the manor was the first red flag. The GPS died 3 miles out, leaving Elias to navigate by the dying light of a bruised purple sunset. The house didn't just sit on the hill, it loomed over it like a predator waiting for a meal. As Elias stepped out of the car, the air felt different. It was thick, static heavy. He pulled his suitcase toward the massive oak doors, and before he could even reach for the knocker, the door groaned open. There was no one there. "Hello?" Elias called out. His voice didn't echo. It felt like the house swallowed the sound whole. He stepped into the foyer. The floorboards didn't just creak, they sounded like bones snapping underfoot. He told himself it was just the wood settling. He told himself the cold draft was just a broken window. But then he saw the mirror. At the end of the hallway stood a floor-to-ceiling Victorian mirror. In the reflection, Elias saw himself, but behind him, just at the edge of the darkness, stood a floor-to-ceiling Victorian mirror. In the reflection, Elias saw himself, but behind him, just at the edge of the darkness, stood a figure. A tall, thin man in a tattered suit, his face a blurred smudge of gray. Elias spun around. The hallway was empty. The first night, by 11 p.m., Elias was settled in the library. Thousands of books lined the walls, smelling of old leather and rot. He was recording his notes on a digital device. "Log 1, he whispered. "The architecture is fascinating, though the ventilation is poor." There's a consistent humming sound coming from the walls. Then the humming stopped. From the floor above, he heard a sound. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like someone dragging a heavy sack of wet sand across the ceiling. Then came the scratching, long, slow fingernails dragging against the wood. Elias froze. He looked at the library door. It was locked from the inside. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound wasn't coming from the ceiling anymore. It was coming from the other side of the library door. And then, a voice, thin and airy, like wind whistling through a graveyard, whispered his name. "Elias, you forgot to close the gate." Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs. "Who's there?" The handle of the door began to turn, slowly, firmly. Click. The door swung open. The hallway beyond was pitch black, but as Elias shone his flashlight into the dark, he didn't see a person. He saw footprints, wet, muddy footprints appearing one by one on the carpet, walking straight toward him.